You ever notice something odd about spiritual awakening? Alan Watts would have smiled at the paradox, and you probably feel it too. You can touch a sense of absolute oneness and at the same time complain that you are terribly lonely. I remember a friend, Mara, telling me over coffee that she had sat in silence for months, read the voices that changed her axis, felt herself like a single seamless ocean of awareness, and then, in the same breath, asking me with real worry why she could not find someone to love. It is almost comic if it were not so tender. Picture an individual wave realizing it is ocean and then running along the sand looking for another wave to dance with on Saturday night. That is where so many awakened people trip. That loneliness is not a glitch. It is evidence that the inner temperature has shifted. The old appetites, the hurried search for completion, lose their music. Today, I will help you see why awakening changes the rules of attraction, how the ordinary contract of romance looks from the perspective of completeness, and what it might take to love without trying to fill a hole. I do not come as a guru offering answers. I come as someone who has listened to dozens of stories from people like Jonah, Priya, Lucas, and Elena, and who has sat with that strange mixture of freedom and ache. First, we will question what you mean by love. Then we will look at how attachment shows up as falling. After that, we will meet the revelation of wholeness. And finally, we will explore the consequences and the patient practice that loving now requires. So start by asking yourself, what do you call love right now? When we say love in everyday language, we often mean a transaction dressed up as romance. You see this in routines: small gifts as currency, compliments as receipts, intimacy as verification. Love becomes a bargaining table where needs are negotiated. I once watched David hand Elena a gift and say that he loved her through a series of practical exchanges. And she, after tasting the sugar of approval, asked for more. The heart wants reassurance, and reassurance can be bought with consistent attention, compliments, tidy apologies, the smell of coffee in the morning, a warm hand on the small of the back. These are not insignificant. They are sensory, grounding gestures. They are, however, sometimes a cover for a deeper hunger. On a stage of desire, people perform roles they learned as children: a mask of competence, a practiced laugh, a tone that promises stability. In this marketplace, we mistake mutual dependence for intimacy. The metaphor works because imagine a theater where each actor expects the other to complete the script. The lights smell faintly of dust, the velvet seats carry the perfume of old audiences, and the applause becomes a measure of worth. It is transactional, not transcendent. We define love by what it gives us rather than what it allows us to become. And when this bargain is broken, we complain of betrayal rather than see the simpler truth that a contract was never the same as communion. Then there is the fall, the way attachment arrives as a dense, immediate gravity. I remember Jonah sitting on my kitchen floor, rain drumming against the window, telling me he felt swept in a sudden rush towards someone he barely knew. He said, "I cannot stop thinking about her, and I will drive across town to see her tonight." That scene is sensory. He speaks with the taste of adrenaline in his mouth, the smell of wet asphalt on his jacket, the sound of tires on the street outside. He is both giddy and terrified. Dialogue unfolds between us in quick, nervous exchanges. "Jonah," I ask, "what are you chasing?" I answer, "I think I am chasing her. But when I get close, I am chasing the feeling, you, when you are held and certain that you will not be abandoned." Me, "Why does that feel urgent now?" Because I woke up and the old distractions do not work anymore. I am exposed." Jonah, "Why not try to be with the feeling instead?" Then the person, "But I do not know how to be with it without using her." Jonah, "That is the fear." And we both laugh a little at the awkwardness. In this falling, there are vivid sensations: the brush of a sleeve, the thump of the heart like a distant drum, the slight metallic taste of longing that makes everything feel immediate. Passion looks generous, but can hide a quiet bargaining. It promises continuity in exchange for surrender. That is the illusion. Awakening interrupts that contract in a way that is radical and simple.
like a wave seeing the ocean and ceasing to identify with edges. When you awaken, the sense of completeness is not an argument, it is an experience. You can touch it on your tongue as sweetness, or feel it as cool air in the lungs. I sat with Priya on a bench at dusk, the park lights silvering the path, and she described that clarity. She said, "I walked into the city and the noise felt like a thin film between me and myself. I could hear footsteps, a vendor calling out sesame and spice, and the distant hiss of a train, and it all seemed like an image projected on a screen. Her skin prickled with the air, the leather of her jacket smelled faintly of cedar, the warmth of the bench seeped through her jeans, and she laughed, 'I am whole, and still I feel the empty place where a companion would sit.' Dialogue between us stretched into the night. Me, what is the empty place like? Priya, it tastes like metal sometimes and like stale bread other times. Me, how do you stay with that? Priya, I breathe and name.
I let the taste be there until it softens. Me, you do not try to erase it. No, I do not. The ocean metaphor repeats itself here. The wave knows it is ocean, yet the shoreline calls for company. That knowledge changes the rules of attraction entirely. It removes urgency and replaces it with an invitation to witness. But then the world continues to play the old games, and that brings consequences. People around you do not always understand that your standards have shifted. At a birthday party, Lucas came up and told me he felt like a child in a room of children, while he had grown into an adult who had different interests. The music smelled like cheap cologne and sugar. The balloons twitched under a ceiling fan. The clink of glasses sounded hollow. He said, "I find myself stepping back from flirtations that used to feel right because they now seem like small exchanges that do not move me, and friends look at me with confusion." Sarah texted him a joke and he did not laugh with the same appetite. There is a social awkwardness that is practical and real. People accuse you of being aloof or picky or unromantic. It is like being an adult at a children party. You cannot help that your sense of what matters has matured. You are seen as distant. That is a social cost. Another tension arrives when even well-meaning partners try to coax you back into the old script. Elena warned me about this. She said, "He kept trying to perform the old kindnesses as if he could manufacture completeness, and when that stopped, the relationship felt fragile. This moment can be sharp. It can sting, like a hand hitting a hot pan. For the awakened person, the pain is different than the old hunger. It is the grief of losing the anesthesia that once kept us company. There are then higher standards and a rarer companion who can meet them. When you no longer require another to validate your existence, you begin to notice particular qualities: presence rather than performance, integrity rather than convenience, curiosity rather than narrative control. Imagine a list that reads like a whisper. Someone who can sit in silence without anxiety. Someone who can say, "I do not know," and mean it. Someone who prefers honest conversation over smooth peace. These criteria narrow the field dramatically. I have seen David at a bookstore watching a stranger read, the way his eyes softened when he noticed patience. He later told me, "She smelled of rain and paper and did not pretend to be anything other than curious." The rarity of such encounters is not a punishment. It is an effect of a moved compass. The dignity here is that you will not lower your criteria for the comfort of company. Expect disappointment from those who are not willing to go there, but also allow for surprises. People like Mara and Lucas have found partners who matched their new measures, and they speak differently now. They trade presence for gestures, and both feel steadier. Then there is the waiting and the price you pay for integrity, which is perhaps the hardest and the most necessary part. Nights become long, not from lack of company, but from the stripping away of illusions that once worked like a balm. I recall a moment of genuine tension I had with a close friend, Elena, when she told me she feared she had ruined her chances because she refused to settle. The apartment hummed with a faint refrigerator sound, the coffee tasted burnt between us, and the light was a soft yellow that made faces look honest. She said, "I feel proud of my choices and also afraid all at once. I want to remain free, but I wonder about empty beds and the small rituals I miss." I asked her, "What would you rather have, Elena? A lie that comforts or an honest silence that teaches me to be whole?" She paused, her fingers stroking the rim of the cup, the porcelain cold, and then said, "I choose the silence." That scene lasted with us a long moment, and it contained the cost. The tension here is psychological and bodily. It lives in clenched muscles, restless sleep, the mouth tasting of metal during midnight doubts. It is around 400 characters of tight, hot worry when you first choose authenticity, and then dissolves into steadier acceptance for many people. Another instance of pressure came with social friends who labeled refusal to play as pride. Priya felt excluded from group dates. Jonah was teased about being too picky. Mara watched invitations dwindle. Each of these setbacks presses on the same raw place. You are learning to reserve your heart for what aligns with integrity, not for what soothes anxiety. This process is lonely and clarifying at once. It builds a quiet backbone that withstands small urgencies and keeps the ocean inside intact. What helps is a practice of presence and a reorientation of vocabulary. Replace need with recognition. Replace completion with companionship. And practice 5 breaths of observing before any reactive move. I teach a small experiment I borrowed from rooms of inquiry, and my students, like Lucas and Sarah, practice it often. Before answering a text that triggers you, breathe 5 times, and notice the taste in your mouth, the tightness in your chest, the sound of the street outside. Name the feeling. I am craving reassurance, or I am craving distraction, and see if you can wait to act. Presence becomes a daily muscle. Another practical move is to cultivate friendships that are expert at silence. David, Elena, and Priya met for monthly walks where they often spoke less and listened more. The trees smelled of resin, the leaves crunched underfoot, the wind came with a salt tang when near the river. Those quiet rituals matter. Community is not found by lowering standards, it is built. Now, before you drift to despair, consider the reframe. This solitude is a certain kind of sacrament. The space you keep as an awakened person is not emptiness to be filled, but an altar that allows a different kind of love to arrive. You will feel loss, and sometimes you will hunger for the old anesthesia of easy admiration, but that hunger is also an invitation to refine what you want. Maybe you never meet another person who shares your exact level of presence, and perhaps you will. Either way, the practice of remaining rooted in your wholeness creates the possibility of encountering a rare other without the old dramas. For a final practical nudge, breathe now 5 times and feel the tide of sensation. Note the taste of salt or metal. Notice a sound close in the room and let it be your teacher. It is a simple exercise that reconnects you with completeness and loosens the impulse to fix everything through someone else. To close, remember this paradox as a companion rather than a verdict. You have discovered a truth that brings both freedom and a unique kind of loneliness. That is not a mistake, it is a threshold. Choosing truth over comfort is an act of courage, and options will narrow in exchange for depth. If today you sit with the ache, try the small practice. Breathe, notice, name, and wait. It does not promise a partner, but it does promise integrity and a steadier heart. Perhaps you will find a fellow traveler who knows silence as well as you do, and perhaps you will not. Either possibility holds a teaching. If you want to continue these conversations, subscribe and return for more reflections on presence and relating. Your comments matter, so write below how this lands with you. Maybe begin with, "I noticed when," or, "In my case," and share a simple situation. We can learn from each other.